I got a call from a friend of mine who was working with Prince as a keyboard tech. He had been hired and even fired 3 different times, which kind of says something about the Prince situation. This guy was really good, my friend Robbie Eagle. But he'd been let go on some temperamental thing and then hired back and then let go and then, so forth. Anyways, I was called because they were in the middle of the Welcome to America tour, which was in 2011, I believe in April. They'd been down at the Forum, and there were going to be 21 shows in LA, different places, different times. And then each one would be announced on a Thursday, where the shows would be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and the shows would go on sale immediately. And then people could buy it and race and buy tickets. It was kind of an interesting idea because Prince was kind of proving you don't need to announce shows 6 months in advance like a lot of places do. They like to announce shows many months in advance, get your money, sit on it, keep it, and they swear that's the only way to do it, but he proved over and over again you don't need to do it that way. Also, the shows at the Forum where I was going to be working were very expensive seats on the floor and right around the stage. It was like $1,000 for the floor, $5,000 to be next to the stage. But in order to make that justifiable, he also had a VIP thing and an after party, and also he would usually bring up the people from the 5,000 seat tables to dance on stage with them at some point. So people with money certainly felt that was worth it. And in charging so much for those seats, it justified what he was doing in the rest, which is up in the loge and the colonnade seats up on the sides. All those seats were $25 a piece, no matter where you were in the room. And from what I understand, that he wanted people to be able to see like 3 or 4 shows in a month, and spend $100 for those tickets, but they could see different shows because each night was different. There were different guest stars, there were different set lists, and even if the set list was to be the same, he wouldn't play it the same every night. So there was a lot of spontaneity and a lot of improv, a lot of challenges. I enjoyed doing it. That was great to see them and how they worked. I was keyboard tech for his musical director, Morris Hayes. Morris had been with Prince for a long time, 20-some years. And an incredible musician, but also was kind of in an interesting spot. They had him on his own stage all the way across the arena on the opposite end of the floor from the main stage. And then he was to listen to the mix out there and then to send messages through me or whoever to get to the sound guys how to adjust the mix so that the audience was hearing a great show. Prince and the rest of the band were in the middle on a stage, but it was basically a show in the round. And it was, bouncing off the walls and things. Prince could hear a bit of it, but really was relying on Morris to make sure the sound was great. And they had different sound people come and go. Several got fired on the way. Anyway, it was quite an experience to see him each night working the crowd, working the band even. And the set list was a suggestion. It would sometimes change mid-show. And most interestingly, when they left and came back for an encore, there was often a kind of normal encore. But those of you that might have seen Prince, he would sometimes disappear. And then 20 minutes later, nothing, and people would start leaving. And then 10 or 20 minutes after that, he would come back. One night, they even had house lights come on, and Prince had not left the building, so the band was told, just stay there. They had to always wait until he was done, and called it off and left before they would go anywhere. Because he might do an after-show party, but in this case, it was like an hour after the show. The lights were on. People had left, and then he came out again, and there might have been no more than 200 or 300 people left in the building. And they allowed everyone to come down on the floor and watch the rest of the show, which is like, half an hour, 45 minutes more or something. There was one night at the Forum when we were told after the show to move about half the equipment up to the Forum Club, which is an upstairs in the building bar, holds a few hundred people, and that they were going to do an after-show set. So we were upstairs putting up a drum set, some speakers, some amps, not a whole lot of gear because there wasn't room, but a good amount. And at one point I'm down there plugging in a keyboard setup, and I'm down on my hands and knees underneath the keyboard. The curtains are closed to the small stage, but I see some pants very nicely pressed and some purple boots walk up to the keyboard, and started hearing somebody tap on the keyboard, and I looked up, and he was there playing along with the keyboard, and I just held up my finger rather than try to have a conversation. I said, wait a minute, and I had to plug in a few more keyboards things, pedals and cables and stuff. Once I got that connected, then I pointed at the keyboard and gave him a thumbs up, and he nodded and then started jamming along to whatever was on the DJ turntable at that point. Just playing keyboards behind the scenes, always making music, always doing that stuff. Nobody knew he was there but he and I, and he was just jamming along to the music, waiting for things to happen. Also, when they called me to do it, I couldn't really go on tour because of my situation here in LA with work and things like that, but I said I could do stuff at LA. And then they had put on some shows also in Fresno, San Jose, 2 shows, and Sacramento, which was kind of cool. So I decided to go up for those, and it was also great because they got to work with Larry Graham being the opening act. And Larry had kind of helped convert Prince to Jehovah's Witness situation. So Prince was much more polite and even spoke to people like his roadies and so forth. And people were allowed to talk to him, things that didn't happen in the past. He was a little more tolerant, and he said, please and thank you. So it was really cool to have Larry Graham around, who's an amazing musician, one of the few that can truly keep up with Prince and certainly inspired him. And then also Cynthia and Jerry from Sly and the Family Stone came out and played some sets, and Prince would play Sly and the Family Stone songs those nights. Really fun. I was asked to do something about Purple Rain specifically, since that's a good theme going on here. I had gotten to know Wendy and Lisa, who are great people and incredible musicians and friends. They were doing a record in North Hollywood here. Wanted to rent some of my weird old keyboards, so I'd taken them over to the studio and set them up, and they were doing some stuff with Dole Bramahall, who was a relative at the time. Very talented guy, and they were producing his solo record and using these interesting keyboards from the past, as I had a kind of interesting collection of those. But at one point, I was speaking to my friend Pat Smear from The Germs and then Nirvana, and now in the Foo Fighters for many years. Pat was a big fan of theirs, and Pat appears in the audience of the Raspberry Beret video. You can see him back in those days. He had more of a kind of a white Jesus suit and dreadlocks. Looks very different than he does now, but Pat was in that video, and he'd met them that day. Pat being kind of an LA staple musician, and Wendy and Lisa certainly based around here with their families since they grew up. So they knew of each other, and I asked, is it okay if I bring Pat to the studio to just visit someday? They said, yeah, sure, come on in. So we went to the studio and popped our heads in, and they said, we're working for another 15 or 20 minutes, so why don't you go wait in the lounge, and then we can hang out and talk for a bit. That was nice, and of course, didn't want to bother them at work, so we went to the lounge and switched on the TV. In those days with cable TV, you couldn't just watch whatever you wanted. It was whatever was on TV at the time. And as we turned on the TV set, it happened to be showing Purple Rain. How ironic. And we laughed. Just Pat and I were sitting there watching it for a while. But then they popped into the studio lounge where we were sitting and said, oh my God. And then we joked and said, do you guys put this on every time you have guests over? As if they were trying to impress us. And of course, they're not those kind of people, but it was fun to joke about and great to watch it with them. And I said, when's the last time you saw this? And they said it had been a long, long time, many, many years since they'd bothered to watch that film. Many of us have seen it so many times, but I'm sure for them it was enough to live through it and enough to have been through that and then on to bigger things after that film came out. But it was cool. That's my Sideways Purple Rain story.